afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending this year's Power of Play events. Like everything else in 2020, this year's a little different. For the past 18 years, we've gathered at the Hotel Murano, over 300 strong, to celebrate the power of play in the lives of young children. Instead of enjoying gazing out over a gathering of friendly and supportive faces, which for me is one of my favorite parts of the lunch, I'm speaking to you from my office, but I know that many friends are viewing from your homes. Maybe you're even in your jammies. Thank you for being here. What continues this year, though, is the amazing support we receive from our perennial sponsors. Thanks to Boeing, Columbia Bank, and Mary Bridge, great supporters. Throughout this Power of Play week, you'll have 3 different events to enjoy. Today's kickoff, tomorrow's conversation between Play to Learn teacher Cheryl and Tacoma's own Kwabi from the Peace Bus. Thursday is our finale, when I'll talk with Mike George, president of Jeff Bezos' preschool venture, Day One Academies. Today, I'll take a few moments to share my reflections over the past year, which was a doozy. Then I'll engage in a conversation about building child-centered community with my friend and my colleague, Dr. Tafona Ervin from the Foundation for Tacoma Students. Last week, we lost a pillar in our community, Harold Moss. Mayor Woodards was extremely close to Mayor Moss and is taking this time to grieve with family and friends. Our hearts are with all who loved Mayor Moss. Lastly, Greentrike Board President Lisa Hoffman will share her thoughts, and I'll be back to close today's event. First, I want to take a moment to reflect on the life and contributions of longtime board member and community gem Dave Edwards, who passed away in February. Dave served on our board of directors for 12 years, the longest standing board member, and he and his wife Pat, a good friend to me and to Greentrike, are the only spouses to have both served as board president. Pat actually is the board president that hired me. Dave was the board president to move the museum to Pacific Avenue and to embrace a bolder, diverse vision for service in our community. Dave was a big Greentrike cheerleader out in the community, and he was a dedicated and trustworthy board member. I loved the way Dave's eyes would brighten when he would see children at play in the museum galleries. And he also became very impassioned and serious when talking about Greentrike's staunch commitment to access. Dave meant a lot to me personally, and I miss him. The staff misses him. We are renaming our office meeting space the Dave Edwards Conference Room. And to playfully remember Dave's routine of showing up early to meetings, a clock will always run 20 minutes ahead of schedule on Dave time. To honor Dave's memory, we dedicate this week's Power of Play events to Dave and send loving thoughts to Pat. I know she's watching today. 1 year ago, the Children's Museum of Tacoma became Greentrike. And when I made that announcement at last year's Power of Play lunch, I said that there was much I knew about Greentrike, but I remained open to all that I did not know about Greentrike. At that time, who could have predicted the multitude and magnitude of challenges we would face together? Despite the hardships, 2020 has gifted us some great learnings and lessons that we will carry forward and that will help guide Greentrike's journey. In mid-March, Greentrike went from a staff of 69 to a staff of roughly 20. Within 2 days, all of our programs ceased operations, and the morning that I had to share that news with our team was my saddest day of work in 24 years. But our team is committed and we're steadfast. They took the news with courage and with hope. I'm happy to report that thanks to careful management, a nimble team, a supportive board of directors, and a generous community, Greentrike is strong and we are viable. By mid-May, we were able to reopen or newly launch essential programming and return our team to nearly 50 employees. Greentrike's strength is that we are practitioners first and conveners and advocates second. We learn by doing and by modeling child-centered quality, and then we work to make things better. Greentrike has helped lead in the creation of the first responder and essential worker day camps in partnership with Tacoma Public Schools, Metro Parks, the YMCA, and the Boys and Girls Clubs. Since then and through December of this year, Greentrike has helped form the vision and execute the plan to provide needed childcare services to our community. And while this does not even scratch the surface of the issue, it's making a difference for hundreds of families every day. Through these day camps, and through the growth of our Greentrike's Cares Kits, expansion of the Muse, a children's center to incorporate school-aged children, and transitioning Play to Learn to a virtual platform, Greentrike is back and serving children in our community. What's ahead in 2020 and what lessons are we bringing forward? Thanks to the pre-pandemic success of our More Than a Museum capital campaign, we will be installing a new playscape in the downtown flagship location and hope to reopen the museum's doors to families in early 2021. We cannot wait to share this beautiful new feature with children and families. Also, in the spring of 2021, we anticipate formally celebrating the opening of the Children's Museum of Tacoma at JBLM. Years in the making for many of us, this will be a first of its kind on a military installation. I was out there last week and I predict it's going to be one of the most beautiful children's museums in the country. It's fantastic. When it's safe to do so, we also look forward to meeting families in their neighborhoods with the Play to Learn program back in action. All of this is important to our mission to serve children, honor them, and champion their play. But the way we achieve that mission is forever changed by the events of 2020. I worry about what this pandemic and the resulting lack of peer-to-peer play will mean for our youngest children. Greentrike must show up strong in advocating for the rights of children in both formal and informal learning settings. It's time to strengthen our convening and advocacy around the need for a more play-based approach to early education and resolve to better the childcare conditions in our community. The injustices that impact children and families in our community must be named and must be eliminated. Greentrike will stand strong with communities of color, with families of every ability, disability, orientation, socioeconomic standing, and we will work first internally to make sure that Greentrike is the best place our team has ever worked, and then externally to make sure that families see themselves in Greentrike and in our team. It is time to more formally lean into the child-centered community work. In partnership with a diverse cross-section of community leaders, the time for change is now. Greentrike will call for the community to help define, build, and celebrate what being a child-friendly city looks like. In 2020, our internal motto was Ride the Trike. Get on this thing and see what it's like, give it a spin, see where it wants to go. I saw us as humble passengers for the first year of the journey, looking to discover the path intended for us. Pedal hard and with intention might be the guiding motto moving forward. Continue to be practitioners dedicated to quality, but pedal hard and pedal with intention into the spaces of convening and advocacy. Take advantage of this climate of change to create change that honors children and champions their right to play, and to root that change in justice. There's a step on the back of the trike. I invite you to come along with me in this journey, because we truly can't do this without our dedicated community members just like you. Your contributions to Greentrike keep us positioned to do this good work and show solidarity in the mission to honor children and champion play. Thank you. Let's now move on to the conversation with Dr. Ervin. Tafona, do you just want to start by maybe sharing a little bit about yourself and the foundation for our friends?
Certainly, thank you. So, as you know, I'm with the Foundation for Tacoma Students. I've been with this organization now for about 6 years, and what's nice is I've gotten to see a lot of the ebbs and flows of what is happening in community, particularly as we think about children cradle to career, which our organization really has a heart for. And while I've been able to see that, I've also noticed like where we've got work to do, right? Where we've got to really think differently systemically, where we've got to think differently holistically about it. I was actually doing a little bit of preparation for this, and you know, the Children's Museum has a program called The Right to Play, and I was really struck with this idea about the right to play. I think all of us, children, adults, adolescents, even elders, we want that right to be free-spirited, to enjoy and move about community without discrimination, without fear of what does it mean because I'm louder than some or a little bit more wild than others. What does it mean to be curious? And I think that if we can think a little bit more, broadly about how curiosity really sparks a lot of creative and innovative things for our youth, but really our community writ large, I think we would be in a place that just changes the way that community thinks about a child-centered community and the way that community shows up. So I've been really focused in my own work as of late on what does it look like to really support in our earliest years? How do we really start to nourish that, build the capacity there? Because we know in the later years, particularly when children move through the system and they go into their careers or their lives, they have a fixed mindset about like, hey, here's how we should be operating, because the way the system has taught me is I now am this place at this time. And so I think it's great to have this conversation, and I'm really excited about what can happen with it.
Well, let's go there for a little bit, this idea of play and freedom. As an organization that is really, you've done such an awesome job shining a light on the importance of children graduating high school and now pursuing additional education. But let's talk a little bit about how do you in that space that's very focused on formal education, how do we help that system maybe recognize and celebrate a little bit more the sparks in our children and their need to play and be creative? Like, what do we do about that?
Good question. I before I came to formal K-12, I was in higher education for a number of years. And there's this old saying like higher ed thinks it's K-12's fault and K-12 thinks it's early learning's fault. And if we could just work backwards, maybe we would, but yet we still continue to work in silo. And now that I have a chance to kind of walk and grapple through all spectrums, I think we all have our own faults in this, but we also have a lot of opportunities in it. And when you support a young person from birth, you're supporting their whole family, their whole ways of being, right? And I think that right now we operate in a function that makes sense. Like, we know if you're little and you're entering kindergarten, you need these basics. If you're a fifth grader and you're ready to transition to middle, you need these basics. But what we're not doing is saying like, how did you even get here? And what is it about your family, your community surroundings, all of the opportunities that we could engage in that helps you to feel exactly who you should be in and out of school? And I think that that's where we as a community need to go. And Tacoma is so right. We are a small city with a big heart and feel, that we have the opportunity to do some of those things where we can change that culture, where a restaurant is welcoming of a family, their littles, their elders, their youth, all together in one table while also holding true to their business model. Similarly, we can go to a really nice arts museum and still feel like everyone is welcomed, because children are getting a chance to explore and see the creative and really amazing artistic ways of operating and being. And so I think I can go on, but I think what I'll summarize by saying is systems are really needing to reevaluate themselves, the way that they've created their infrastructure, the way that they've thought about their business, and strip it all away and say, what would it look like if we were just to say no rules, no bars, like let's have at it? How would that look? What would that feel? And I think we would all be surprised that the world wouldn't end and that it wouldn't burn down. I think that we would all see just a more fluid way of living and occupying our spaces.
And I think we have a couple of really great opportunities to shake things up. I mean, you've got twofold. COVID is having us all think about our systems and our processes and what are we doing, how can we do it differently, right? If there was ever a time to change, it would be now. The other thing is, thank goodness we're all looking at things with a diversity, equity, inclusion lens. But, and you and I've talked about this before, how often do we really think about our youngest citizens as a part of that mix? They make up a pretty significant percentage of our population, yet we don't talk about, we don't put a filter in for that.
Right.
And so in my view, and I would love to talk to the mayor about this, as we're putting decisions through filters, can we make sure that we're pausing a moment to ask ourselves, how is this going to affect children or the people that care for them and love them?
Right.
So I love that. And I also, this notion of sparks, and you touched on this, that thing that is special in me, in you, if we can help our little people identify and flourish in their sparks. And actually, don't you think that's one of the reasons why, the SAMI, the SOTA, the IDEA schools that are, part of Tacoma Public Schools, what's your view? I mean, they're very successful in getting their kids to get into college. And what do you think? Do you think that celebrating children's need to be creative, is that part of their secret sauce?
I would say so. And I think there is a good balance and a need for both and, right? I think the creativity that is happening with the innovative schools like SAMI, SOTA, and IDEA is one that allows for children who know early on what it is that makes them spark, allow for them to then flourish in this environment.
Yeah,
but
good
there are
point.
also kids who they just don't know. And there's many reasons, right? Many factors. And I think to your point about the way we think about our world and the way that we structure systems is like we assume a lot for our young people because we're cautious. Like we want to make sure that they're taken care of and they're safe. And yeah, that's who we should be. But sometimes it's at the expense of really allowing them to grow and nourish. And so to the point of what does it look like, again, from a cradle to career perspective, I think that there are safeguards that must be in place while also creating the space for flexibility and adaptability to allow for youth and young people to figure it out on their own. And that way they can learn and grow from that. So then they can tell both adults as well as younger people, like, hey, this is what I learned. Don't do that again because it might not be the best way for us to live. And I also think as we think about systems, particularly innovative systems, that we can learn a lot from the voices of our young people around what they think, believe, feel, because the conditions that we are putting up for them may be completely like just smothering their own creative beings, but we won't know that because we haven't given that space for voice and information sharing. And I think that now is the time, as we're seeing, particularly in the racial unrest, there's so many young people who are stepping up and talking about how this is impacting them and what does this mean for them. And I think this is that time for us, as we're thinking about a child-centered community, to think about it from the young people's perspective as well, because they have a lot of wisdom and knowledge, more than we give them credit for.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we've tried to do a couple different times at our annual symposium is start the day by grounding ourselves in what we call the image of the child. And that's just what you described. If you go through time and space with an image of children being capable, competent, curious in a positive way, children are very capable of guiding their own learning journey if we pay attention and watch and learn. So I do agree with you. I think there's a balance there of, we know there are particular lessons and life lessons and academic lessons we need them to learn, but the way they get there can be done in a much more creative way. So let's shift a little bit. And when I think about child-centered community, I think about what are the conditions that we would expect to see in a community that was really putting children at the center. And then what conditions need to be eradicated because they are unacceptable in a community that's putting children at the center. So let's start with the negative first so we end on a positive note. But in your view, Tafona, what are those conditions that we really need to be obsessed with and change for the better or get rid of them?
Yeah, this is also a really good question. And my mind goes to many places. But I think I'll start with, we have got to be more proactive in the way that we think about all people in our community, particularly our youth, young adults, and young people. When we are reactive, we're responding to, for example, health conditions of littles who are being born into different environments that may or may not have the needs that they need at home. We react to it because we learn after the fact, which means we've already missed out. Yes. But if we took the lessons that we've learned to date and we proactively invested, and sometimes this is where I think people get tense because they're like, oh, I see a dollar bill. This is going to cost us money. It will always cost us money on the front end. But in the end game, we're going to see savings, cost savings, significant savings at a governmental level, at a federal level, at a local level, all levels, because we've done the right things up front, so that a family who is entering into a space are not going without, but rather they have an abundance of what they need, and therefore their stress levels are down. It reduces what might happen to a little person in ACEs and their adverse childhood experiences. It allows for them to be that creative young person because those basic conditions are taken care of. I think if we think about that in the context of K-12 or in our school years, the same is true. You're right on. Right now, COVID has given us this flexibility to say, let's do away with standards. We're just going to live and figure this out. And while it might not be as meaningful, it might not be as accelerant, what it did do is it allowed for families, educators, and children to think differently about how they make up their time and what do they learn. But we don't value that in our current educational system. We ask for A plus B plus C.
Yeah.
And we're looking for this really formulaic outcome that really is limiting that innovation that you're describing. And as they move up the continuum, and I think about young adults who are entering into the career space, our workforce, it really circles back to early learning, because you can't work if childcare is not stabilized, is not sustained, is not flexible. And what we're seeing is a workforce that is not being adaptive to the needs of families. And we have families who want to both work and contribute to this community, but cannot because they're impeded by the lack of quality childcare that exists. And so young people who might have families or who might be in families of their own are finding themselves not being able to do what they want. And so really we're impacted by all of the barriers and conditions that we put out there because we think we know best, because we're acting in a reactive space. So if we were proactively thinking about this, and this gets to the conditions of what it could be in a really amazing child-centered community, is we would fully invest in quality care starting at the earliest years. We would give families opportunities to be flexible so that they can work a job even if they're limited mobile in their transportation, or they are limited in their income and opportunities. They would have a space where they could, safely have their children learn, grow, and nourish. They would be able to work and thrive and move up that economic ladder in a way that situates their family in a better space. I have to note, I think that right now, in particular for families of color, there needs to be communities that are nourishing families and youth of color, who give them space to feel their authentic self so that they can show up and be who they are, because culturally that is what's valuable to them, and it isn't looked as an other, and they're not feeling othered by a system or by an infrastructure. And I think that all of those things are starting to take a bit of shape, but we have a lot more work to do, and it takes leaders like what Greentrike and others are doing to create this community that's really focused on centering young people. But we also have to be willing to let go of what we've done forever, because the risk, again, is that we will perpetuate the same inequities and inequalities that are limiting young people from thriving and being their best selves.
Yeah, when there's tragedy in our world, I often say, people say, what do you think is the solve to this? Or I said early learning. So I 1,000,000% agree with you. I also agree that childcare, and you and I are both involved in a project to try to provide more after school enrichment opportunities, just like you're talking about. The kids that know what their sparks are, great. You can navigate to those activities or play around with new ones. And what a bite that would take out of the childcare crisis if we could lift that up into a system-wide solution. So that feels exciting to me. I agree with you, childcare. I worry about the foster care system, and not only the way that operates, but really curious to swim upstream and see if there are some things that we can provide families, I think, to your point, proactively early on that might get rid of the need for that to exist in our community. Yeah. So let's flip it. So what ingredients, what assets do we think we have as a community that really position us well to really hang on to this child-centered thing in an important way?
Wow, yeah, I think Tacoma is rich with assets. We have so many people who are willing to do what it takes to get things done. And that is, in my opinion, one of the biggest key ingredients is the willingness to do it. But in addition to that, we have a long-standing relationship. So Tacoma Public Schools, I have to give huge credit. They are one of the only districts. Now, I travel nationally quite a bit. I see many districts across this country. And this lack of willingness to be inclusive of community and partnership limits the opportunities that can exist. Districts are governmental agencies by nature. They have strict and fixed ways of funding. They have strict and fixed ways of doing business. And yet, if community overlays and complements those strict and fixed ways of being, it changes the complete dynamic, which we see here in Tacoma. So let's speak about the whole Access Pass, right? Like, what an incredible partnership between Metro Parks, Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, and Tacoma Public Schools. When that initiated, it really allowed for big agencies who have, sustainable funding, have long-term and long-time ways of doing enrichment and after-school and out-of-school time learning that is paired now with schools, that it allows for both academics and enrichments to thrive. Not only does it do that, it helps families to say, I have a consistent place where my child is going to be cared, loved, and supported in all developments of their life, that I can continue to do this work or do what I need to do, that I feel supported by my community in that way. So imagine really maximizing that, scaling that to include our earliest learners in the way that we think about 0 to 5, both childcare, both just activities. Imagine scaling that up. If you had your parks and your after-school programs and your school districts and your healthcare systems and your government agencies and your local businesses, like all working together to say we support the whole community, therefore the whole child, what would happen, right? What would it look like? We would have spaces where kids can just drop in, sit, and do what they wanted to do without like, hey, are you buying something, or what purpose do you have here? All of these things contribute to a whole community. And if we thought about that in the context of our children and youth and young adults, wow, what an amazing community Tacoma could really be and thrive. And I think that there's potential. I think we're starting to get there. I think there is conversations that are brewing, which is great. But we really just got to put aside individual systems and organizations and talk about children first and put them at the center of all of this work. And that is where we're going to see the magic happen.
And I agree with you. And being involved in the distance learning day camps for the children, working so closely with Tacoma Public Schools, who are, you're right, innovative. They really are. Mm-hmm. But it's been interesting to watch both for-profit and nonprofit partners all come together and push each other's edges just a little bit. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like building a soup together. It's like, well, I've got carrots, I can put them in. Yeah. I've got the turnips or whatever. And it's been a really rich experience. And to see some of these big systems that you think of as being inflexible suddenly learn some flexibility when you help them see a different way to do it. Absolutely. So I agree. I think that's definitely partnership is one of our assets that we can leverage in this community. I think a willingness to do it. I would love to see more traces of children throughout our community, both, as you say, using their feet to explore our neighborhoods mm-hmm. and our wonderful mm-hmm. assets in our community, our parks and things, but also their artwork, their mm-hmm. thoughts, their writings, things yes. like that throughout our community. So that's... it's going to take a little bit of time, like you say, a dedication of resources, but I have seen over the, we've really been leaning into, all of us, this child-centered community space for, 5, 6, 7 years now, and it's really amazing the progress we've made. But I think there's an impatience that's brewing in my belly and your belly, which feels good. Mm-hmm. And so if COVID or if the atrocities that we've had to go through this year have shaken something loose in all mm-hmm. of us, then I am grateful for that. Mm-hmm. And I think we can really take the ball and run with it. Yeah. So
I want to just pick up on that. I think you're right. Research tells us that it takes about 7 years to see real, sustainable change happen. And in this work, we know time is of the essence. It's always urgent for us to do something now. Sometimes philanthropy is limited in what they want to do because they want to see results immediately. But we're talking about human lives. We're talking about a system of social services that is so diverse. with unique needs, mental health needs, physical ability needs, like culture, you name them. It's so diverse. And yet we try to force it into a singular category and say, go forth and do something great. And yes, that desire, that willingness is definitely part of it. But we also have to honor that time that it takes, right? Because relationships really are at the core of a lot of these things. And that's true for relationships with littles and adults, as it is with adults and adults trying to do the work. And if we don't acknowledge or honor that, we're really just fighting an uphill battle, right? So I think that there's something to be said that this is the long-term work. This is legacy work, honestly. This will be work that will continue well after you and I are both gone from these roles or even on this planet. And so therefore, how do you create these long-lasting, entrenched systems and conditions that allows for it to continue to get better? And I do agree. I will note, when COVID first hit, I did an activity with my staff and I said, in 100 years, what do you think the history books will say? And I could not even imagine all of the different events that were going to happen thereafter and how that was going to continue to change the history in that moment. And I think this is a good opportunity for us too, as community leaders, as system agent leaders, is thinking about what have we learned and what can we grow from and where do we start to become more flexible and willing. Dr. Garcia, love him, with Tacoma Public Schools, always says, I am an advocate for bending rules, but I won't break them. And I've always said that I am an advocate for asking for forgiveness than for permission. And while that might seem like, oh, I don't know, there is something really wise in that. Because the more that we stay, fixed on this is the way it is, you can't do anything more, the more that we perpetuate the things that we don't want. And so being flexible, being willing, being able to just try new things is really what's going to get us to that next place.
Yeah, and I just kind of on a final note, I'm thinking about little Chanel that's about to turn 2, and we'd been in this COVID space now for 7-ish months, and that's a really large percentage of her life that her natural development has been denied her.
Yep.
And so I am thinking a lot about urgency and how do we create this perfect blend of bending rules, legacy work that also is rooted in urgency, because for our little people, too much of their lives have been affected. And it's absolutely critical that we move forward. And I guess I'd remind us all, a friend reminded me that 2020 is the year of perfect vision. And so I challenge us all to think about what that means and the action that we're going to put behind that. So Tafona, thank you for being here, my friend, and for sharing some time and space with me today.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Hi, my name is Lisa Hoffman, and I'm the current board president of Greentrike. I got to know this organization when my son, who's now 11, went to preschool at the Children's Museum. A story I love to tell about the Greentrike way is when the teachers brought in a large, hand-motored water pump. They put it in the middle of the room and asked the children what it was. After a few days of playing with it and trying different things, one of the children said, "Let's put water in it." On their own and through play, with beautiful guidance from the teachers, the children had discovered something new and exciting. This is the Greentrike way, honoring children and championing play, where the child powers the trike and with a step in the back for a friend to come along. The organization has grown significantly over the years. Our programs and services extend far beyond 4 walls, and we're now more than just a museum, leading to our necessary name change from the Children's Museum to Greentrike. In addition to the museum in Tacoma, we'll be opening the first ever Children's Museum on a military installation, Joint Base Lewis McChord, very soon. Greentrike has also hosted, now they're done virtually, Play to Learn experiences at over 20 sites across Pierce County, offering free access to engaging activities for young people and their caregivers. Greentrike has opened preschools powered by play and the Muse Child Care Center that puts the Reggio model of a child-centered world into being. Greentrike has held a number of community symposiums as well, on topics that encourage attendees to think inspirationally about what our community could look like if we were truly thinking of children as citizens. And it advocates for our little people and equitable access to quality environments for everyone. In recent months, this is clear in how Greentrike works to address our mounting childcare crisis, how Greentrike is providing playful care kits to multiple nonprofits, and significantly, with key partners, how Greentrike showed leadership in providing day camps for the children of essential workers. The Greentrike umbrella encompasses all of this work and has effectively pivoted its efforts in our new normal. Greentrike remains open and active and critical to our diverse Pierce County communities, but it will be stronger moving forward with your support. The Power of Play Lunch is our second largest fundraising event, and people gave generously last year. We raised over $70,000 in gifts at that lunch in 2019, and I'm hopeful we can beat it here today in 2020. Please join me in making a gift today. A stretch gift if you can. You may want to consider a monthly rather than a one-time gift. You could show your 253 support with monthly gifts of $20, $50, or $30, or donate $253. Every gift matters. These are unusual times, but together we can build brighter futures for all. Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody, for joining us on this first day of the Power of Play Events Week. We hope to see you tomorrow with Teacher Cheryl and Kwabi, and I hope to see you Thursday for my discussion with Mike George of Day One Academies. Until then, I wish you a wonderful afternoon, and I thank you deeply and sincerely for your support of Greentrike. Have a great day.